It's a play about writing. Tell me more how this is different from other plays and stories that's talking about the writing process.
When I first read the script, I was like, oh, okay, so this is all about like writers writing and stuff. And then when the scene comes where like the books come to life, it was such a nice little treat, a nice little twist where I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. Like, and then to kind of going back to your last question about where they all live, I think it's all such a physically different world. Like each book is so different, so we get to really explore like those genres. So it feels like I'm in a completely different play than the writers, than with the writers. But yeah.
I think what makes this play different from other plays or movies about writers is the fact that you actually get to experience what they're writing. A lot of times it's about the process, but you never actually get to hear what they're writing about, and not only hear it, but we get to see their characters. And even though they're totally separate, we're still discovering the things that are happening in the real world and how they show up in the characters' worlds, and to see like the sides of this writer is coming out in this character that they're writing. So I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, which is awesome.
I think you're absolutely right. I've never seen anything like this, in that the format, the framework is the retreat, and each writer's struggles and successes about writing are embedded in the play, but the explosion of the books to be materialized within that world, I don't know that I've ever witnessed anything quite like this. So it'll be a really new experience for audiences.
A written play about writing. It does seem a little circuitous, doesn't it? It's interesting because writing itself is such an interior process. Robert Heinlein said, there's nothing to be ashamed of about writing. Just do it in private and wash your hands afterwards.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's kind of an interesting challenge to be dealing with something that is about writing. Obviously, the writer put a lot of things about writing in it. We talk about writer's block quite a lot in it. We talk about the process of how much of your own life you can use in what you're writing that's not going to freak out your family and friends because they're suddenly being, Shelley's character uses, she gets engaged to all of these men just so she can write about them and use them as her inspirations, yes, her favios. So we spend a lot of time talking about the process of it, which I think is endlessly interesting. But that's what you generally do at a writer's retreat. You spend a lot of time talking about the writing process. But anybody else?
Me first. It's really interesting because the show, you stop it. This is what most of our rehearsals.
This is all of what our rehearsals are.
The show I just finished was Collected Stories by Donald Margulies, which is also all about writers. It's a two-hander. It's a young writer and her mentor who's published and very popular writer. And so it was interesting going from that show where we talk all about writing to this show. But I think one of the main differences, other than tone, because that show is a drama and this is, fun comedy, is that we get to see the stories come to life, and we get to see how we're inspiring each other in the stories that come to life. So things we mention in conversation at dinner, 5 minutes later, the audience gets to see that same thing mentioned in someone's story. So you can start to see the connective threads of how people take a piece of inspiration from each other or from the lake or from the cottage, and how it directly ends up in their stories, which I think is really fun. And I'm still catching things. I hear stuff in the stories and I'm like, oh, that's from, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead now, go ahead.
And it's interesting, there's a lot of stuff Peter's doing in terms of theming with the importance of the art. Most times in a story about creating art, when the art gets created, it's like a big explosive, thing, and very often, it's well received, and it's a big deal when you finally finish. And that's not what this play is about. This play is about the other 90% of the time for writers. When you're walking in, I think it's Shelley's line, and I've heard other real life writers say it as well. It's like you sit down and you work like a farmer, and you put your hours in, and most of the time nothing comes through. So the play's so much more about the characters' interactions and a little bit about the, comic mundanity of the day-to-day life of a writer, as opposed to the
Good point.
explosive creative process that we're all used to as an audience.
Yeah. What do you have to say on the subject?
I think something that Alex brought up with the tone of the play, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen a lot of shows about writers and about the artistic process that are just angst upon angst upon angst, and this show is just so much fun. It's a big, enormous, raucous comedy, like laugh out loud, gut-busting comedy, and you don't see a lot of shows about the very personal, intimate process of writing that also are incredibly laugh out loud, funny, and entertaining. So that's something that I felt was different about this show.
That's true.